Hello guys, I'm going to go over the questions from the quiz that you took last week on graphing sine and cosine functions. So number 1 is on the screen. F of x equals 2 sine of 3x plus 1. Before we draw the x and y axis, you need to identify the parameters. Okay, so starting with the amplitude. So the amplitude is found right here. Okay, so the amplitude for this problem is 2. Next is the period. Now the period is 2 pi over b. Okay, and b is the number here, the coefficient of x. So this one's going to be 2 pi over 3. Okay, for horizontal translation or phase shift, we look to see if there is a number added or subtracted in parentheses to the x, if we're adding or subtracting from the x. Okay, if we're adding to or subtracting from the x, but there's none here because I don't see any parentheses. So for this one we just have 0 or none. And then vertical translation, we find that number right here. Okay, so that one is 1. So this graph is translated up 1 unit. The amplitude is 2, so that means that we need 3 spaces, above the x-axis just to have enough room for this graph. So I'll give myself 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. At least 4. Draw the x-axis. Okay, and then for the y-axis, since there is no horizontal translation, I'll just draw it closer to the left side. Oops, sorry, let me fix that a little bit. It's not very neat. It's not any better, sorry. Okay, and so y, remember to number it, and if I'm counting every tick mark as 1, I have to be consistent within that axis. Okay, so above and below the, a positive y, negative y, if I'm counting by 1s, I have to count by 1s throughout, and they have to be evenly spaced out. Okay, because some of you made a mistake, and that was one of your mistakes. Okay, so check your work. Horizontal axis, I'll just count every 2 squares. I'll put a tick mark, and so this is going to be my 2 pi over 3, the fourth one, the fourth tick mark. And some of you had trouble labeling the axis. Okay, so 2 pi over 3 is the period. Half of that is pi over 3, so I have to go half the distance. Okay, some of you were putting them in the wrong tick mark, so half the distance is right there. Half of pi over 3 is pi over 6. So half the distance from 0 to pi over 3 is pi over 6. Okay? Now, for the third tick mark right here, I'm going to take pi over 6 and multiply by 3 because, why? Because there's 3 spots. So I'll put the work up here on the side. So 3 times pi over 6. That gives you 3 pi over 6, which is pi over 2. So this one gets labeled with pi over 2. Okay? So 1 period is going to fit right here. Now another thing that we're going to add before we graph the curve is the horizontal asymptote, because remember there is a vertical translation of positive 1 right here. So that means that we have to move our x-axis 1 unit up. Okay, and I'll just go all the way across because I have to draw 2 periods. I'll label the x-axis later. I just want to make sure that I draw 1 period right now. Okay, so I'll use red to draw it. Okay, so let's see. For sine, the zeros are beginning, middle, and end. Maximum is 1/4 of the way. Remember, we're going 2 units up. And minimum is 3/4 of the way, so it's 2 units down from the dotted line. So 1, 2 right here where the division line is. And then we connect. Okay, there's one period. And so like I said, we're going to extend it to we're going to draw 2 periods. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, 2 times 2/3 is 4/3. So this is going to be 4 pi over 3. Okay? And so every tick mark is a sixth. So after 2/3, which is actually 4/6, I've got 5/6. And then 6/6, which is pi. And then 7/6. Okay? So there's your x-axis labeled completely. And I'm going to graph the rest of, or the other period. So here's beginning, middle, end. Maximum occurs 1/4 of the way, so at 5 pi over 6. Minimum is 3/4 of the way, so that's at 7 pi over 6. And then just connect the rest of the points. Okay? So there you have it. I know with the stylus it's a little hard to retrace your steps, but there it is. 2 periods of this equation. Alright, number 2. Again, we got to identify the parameters first. So the amplitude for this problem is 1. Now I know there's a negative right here, but all that tells me is that there's going to be a reflection. So the amplitude is 1, and then I'll just put R for reflection to remind me that there's going to be a reflection over the x-axis. Okay, for number 2 for the period, it's 2 pi over b. Oops. So in this problem, it's going to be 2 pi. The coefficient of x is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Okay? Horizontal translation or phase shift. This is where a lot of you made a mistake. You looked at the pi over 2 and automatically just put that down. Okay? But remember, when there's a b value inside the parentheses, you have to take that into account. So what we do is we set, it's called the argument, we set the argument equal to 0 and we solve. Now in your notes I gave you like a little formula that you can just use without like a shortcut, but if that doesn't make sense to you, that's fine. Do it this way. 2x minus pi over 2, so that gives me 2x equals pi over 2. And so that means that if I divide both sides by 2, that means I'm multiplying by a half. I end up with x equals pi over 4. So the horizontal translation is actually pi over 4. And it's positive, so that means it's going to go to the right. Okay. Vertical translation, there's nothing added or subtracted after the parentheses, so that one is none. Okay. So x and y axis, since there's no vertical translation and the amplitude is 1, I'm just going to draw the x-axis right here in the middle of the space. And let's see, vertical's fine right there. I'm going to count 2 lines for 1. Oops. And for this one, let's see, the period is pi. So I'll do the same thing. Every two little squares, I'll put a tick mark and I'll label that pi. So that means that this is pi over 2. This is pi over 4. And then this would be 3 pi over 4. Okay? Now, because there's a horizontal translation to the right, pi over 4, that's one tick mark over. Okay, so I'm going to put a vertical line right here. So this is like my new y-axis. Okay, I'll graph the function in red. So for cosine, the zeros are 1/4 and 3/4 of the way. Okay, so 1/4 would be right here at pi over 2, and 3/4 would be over here at pi. Now, maximum is beginning and end, but remember there's a reflection, so that means it's not going to be a maximum, it's actually going to be a minimum. So there's going to be a dot right here, and then dot over here. I didn't label it yet because remember we shifted to the right, pi over 4, but it's over here. I'll label it in a minute. The minimum is normally in the middle, but because there was a reflection, it's now a maximum. So right here, be the maximum. Let me just label this right here. This would be, we're going by fourths, so this would be 5 pi over 4. Just the 4 didn't come out very good. So 5 pi over 4. Okay, so now we connect the dots. And here's one period. Okay, but again, you're asked to draw 2, so I can do half on the left of this period and half on the right, or I can do all of it on the right. So let's see how many tick marks I can get in here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so I can draw all of it to the right, or I can draw some of it to the left. Like I said, some to the right, some to the left. It's up to you. So let's see. 1, 2. I could only fit 3/4 of the period over here on the left side. So I can do half and half. It's again, it's all up to you. This would be negative pi over 4. And then over here, 6 pi over 4, which would be 3/2. 7 pi over 4. 8 pi over 4, which would be 2 pi. And then 9 pi over 4. Okay, so now the next zero would be here at 3 pi over 2. And then it would be a maximum, then a 0, then a minimum. So connect the points. Notice the ends, I curve them back up. Okay. Now on the left side, if I wanted to continue on the left side, I would the 0 would be here at 0, 0. Then it would be maximum, and then it would be back to 0. So it's not a complete period, but gives you an idea. So one full period would be from here to here, or one full cycle. Here's another full cycle. Okay, and on the left we only got 3/4 of a cycle, so it's not a complete period. Okay. All right, number 3, you have amplitude is 4. Again, I'm going to put an R after it to remind me that there's a reflection over the x-axis. The period is 2 pi over b. In this problem, b equals 1. Okay, because there's nothing in front of the x. I don't see a number in front of the x. So then we know that it's 1. So 2 pi